As said, I'm Manuel Reinhardt. I work for syslab.com. I want to talk about Solr and how to use it with Plone. I'm assuming that at least some of you have heard of Solr. I'll briefly say what it actually is. It's based on the Lucene indexing and search engine, which is written in Java. Solr adds to that an HTTP interface. You can get XML and JSON over HTTP. It also adds some features like caching, replication. It has a nice web admin interface. And it basically makes a high-performance search server out of that Lucene engine. It's made by Apache, so it's available as open source and an Apache license. So if you know a bit of Java, you can also hack around in the code. I said I wanted to talk about Solr and Plone. Why would I even want to connect those two? One big argument is speed. Solr is just terrifyingly fast when it comes to indexing and search. The portal catalog is also fast. You can also search, but it has its limitations, especially if you have a lot of content in your ZODB, you have a lot of text in your searchable text, then at some point it gets a bit slow. But speed is not the only thing. You also have some great features that Solr offers. Things like faceted search, hit highlighting, complex query language, cross-site search, and so many more. I'm going to mention a few of those later on. So say you want to try it and do want to connect Solr to Plone. How do you go about it? There are several options. I want to mention three of them. One is collective Solr. Its approach is to index all indexes of all content, both in the portal catalog and in Solr. It does that by registering an additional indexer through collective indexing. And then when you query the catalog, it checks whether the searchable text is a part of the query. And if so, it diverts the whole thing to Solr, and everything runs through Solr. And its response is used as the search results. There's also ALM Solr Index. I can't say too much about this one. I haven't had too much experience with it. The approach is slightly different. It doesn't tamper so much with the catalog itself, but it implements a single index inside the catalog through a Solr connector. So you don't store the indexing data somewhere in the ZODB or somewhere, but it constructs queries to Solr and it updates the index there and gets results from Solr. There's also Searched, which is an even more low-level approach. It's basically a Python Solr API, which is more powerful. You have more options there, more things you can do, but it's also less convenient. You have to do more pedestrian work to get stuff or to get results that are usable in Plone. Built on top of that, there is Plone Internet.search. That's, as the name suggests, is used in Plone Internet or Quave. It's based on Scorched, but it's tuned towards Plone or Plone Internet, so it's more convenient to get stuff out of there and you don't have to do as much yourself, but it still retains some of the great powers and features that the Solr query language has. All of these approaches give you access to some awesome features that Solr has. I only have time to mention a few. I encourage you to look online for what else Solr can do. One thing is boosting. A good search, I would say, is something that lets you find what you're looking for, or in other words, which shows you stuff that is relevant to your search. And if you have multiple results, as you usually have, the most relevant results should, of course, be shown first so that you see them first. And Solr does that by default. Results that come from Solr are by default sorted by a score that is usually calculated by things like how often does the search term occur in the searchable text of a document. But you can influence that score. You can specify actually what you think is relevant and what you think a high score constitutes. And that's just what boosting does. So you can more or less put arbitrary functions into Solr that it uses then to calculate the score. A very valuable real-life example is a date boost. For example, in a social internet setting, maybe you've heard Alex's talk before mine, you're probably looking for stuff that has been added or edited recently, something that's active and that's not been lying around for ages. And to do that, you would want to assign a high score to a recent document and a lower score to an older one. I won't go into too much detail on that formula there, but you see that the modified date is taken, and what it basically gives you is a nice curve that assigns a high score to a recent document, and then it curves off nicely towards the older stuff. The next feature I want to, I almost say to highlight, is highlighting. You can see an example here. It's in German. Please bear with me. I think you should get the gist though. The blue thing is, of course, the title of the result. Then comes the URL. And that thing there is a snippet from the searchable text. And the thing in square brackets is the search term that I searched for. So you don't only see what documents mention your search query, but you see the actual context, the bit of text that mentions the search term. It's basically what Google also does. If you type anything into Google, you get these small bits of text where you usually can already judge, yes, this sounds interesting, or no, this only mentions my search term in passing, or it's just inside a boring list or something. So that's usually really helpful. And Solr can do that as well. It can deliver these snippets of text with a bit of configuration that contain the search term, and you can configure how that's displayed. I chose to just put square brackets around them, but you can basically do arbitrary things there to highlight your search term. One warning I want to give there is if you're generating these snippets from the searchable text, which is a sensible thing to do, then it must be stored in Solr in full so that it can process it. So in portal catalog terms, it must be metadata, and that means it would be returned with every response that you get from Solr. So for example, for Office documents or something that has a very large searchable text, that can get really big. So if you have hundreds or thousands of search results and deliver the searchable text for all of them, that is just not going to work, because all of that is going over the network. And it's going to take much too long. But luckily, Solr allows you to do that rather easily. You can specify what fields to return. You just have to pay a bit of attention what you're storing in Solr and what you want to return with every response and what you don't want. And finally, if you are setting up a Plone site for something like a bit larger company or something like a university, then usually there is more than just this Plone site that you're setting up. There may be even other Plone sites or other web servers, other document stores, or what is there, where people need to get information from, and the user might not always know where exactly is this information that I'm searching for. Am I at the right place going to this Plone site? Well, they don't really need to care, because what you can do is index multiple sources into the same Solr. You can index other Plone sites with the approaches that I've mentioned, collective Solr, for example. You can even crawl arbitrary sites with Nudge, which is another tool from Apache, which works really well with Solr. With just a bit of configuration, you can point it at some other website and it crawls it and indexes everything into your Solr. And what you do then to make everything available to be searched from your Plone search is two tweaks. You tweak the query so that you search for all the paths and not just /Plone or whatever your Plone site is called, but for everything that Solr basically has to offer. And you tweak the results page that usually just links to your own Plone site, of course, because it assumes everything comes from there. And you do a little check where a result comes from, and you put the right domain or host name in to get the external link right. And this is the same example from before. It doesn't only do highlighting, but it also does the cross-site search. I hope you can see these different color icons here. These represent different sources of information. They have different host names here. So these are results that come from a Solr that has different sources indexed, and this is indicated to the user here with a little tweak of the results page. So, do you get all this for free? Well, of course there are some things you have to pay attention to. For one thing, everything goes over the network. Solr is an external component. You do HTTP queries, and you have to pay attention a little bit. It mostly comes down to what you save in index processing time versus the time the result spends on the network. And as I've said, Solr is really fast. So if you save enough time there in index processing, and you don't have too much time that the result needs to go over the network, then you've basically won. You've gained some time. So with a Solr in a local network in the same data center or whatever, it should be fine. But as I said, you have to be careful that you don't send masses and masses of data. For example, exclude the searchable text if it needs to be stored for highlighting. Another thing that comes from Solr being an external component is the transaction integrity. It's not always sure that transaction is atomic, because you have to communicate with the outside when you are doing stuff like reindexing. There is basic transaction support in collective indexing, and so also in collective Solr. But in my experience, there are still situations where something goes wrong. Sometimes Solr does get out of sync. You have old, stale data in there. Some update doesn't get through, that kind of thing. That's probably not an unsolvable problem. I expect to be work to be done there in the future, but it's not that often. So maybe it's okay in your use case to just reindex one or two items and forget about it. Another thing is that commits can be slow in Solr. The Solr is optimized for search and for lookup of the indexes, and the trade-off that you have is that indexing can take a bit of time. So if you have some view that updates your content and you need to reindex, then you may wait a little while until the Solr index is updated, and you can render the result and show it to your user. But what you can do about that, Solr has a feature for that as well, which is called asynchronous commits. So instead of waiting for the index to update, you basically just send your data to Solr. Solr says, okay, got it, and you can go on with rendering your view and showing it to a user, and in the background Solr will update the index and do the commits and everything that it needs to do. But that of course means there is a small delay in between your rendering of your view and the index being updated. So at the time you show something to the user, the Solr index might not yet be up to date. So you just need to be aware of that. For example, we had a calendar view that was generated from Solr, and that let you create an event. And after you created it, you got back to the calendar view, say the month view. And if you had asynchronous commits activated there, you would just not see your event. Because yes, the data was sent to Solr, but what you were using to generate the calendar view was out of date because it was still processing the update, and the event was just not there. That's not an unsolvable problem either. Maybe you just need to not use asynchronous commits in situations like this, or you can do some trick. I mean, after all, you know what event was just created, so maybe you just add that to the Solr data you're getting. So there are ways to solve this. So in summary, I've mentioned several methods of connecting Solr to Plone. I've only scratched the surface on the awesome features that Solr offers. And I've mentioned some manageable costs and risks, some stuff that you need to be aware of. So in conclusion, if you want to know, should I use Solr for my project? I'm tempted to just say yes, but I'll qualify that a little bit. If you subscribe to that philosophy that query should be really blazingly fast and indexing is okay if it's a little bit slow, then yes, you should definitely consider trying Solr, especially if you have a large site with loads and loads of data to index and to search. Or if one of the features that I mentioned or that you can find online appeals to you and gives value to the setup and the customer that you're working with, then yes, definitely look into it. So that's all for now. As I said, there's a lot more to discover. Do check out the Solr user guide and wiki on the Apache websites. There's a good Solr training on the Plone training website. Or yeah, just find me or one of my colleagues from syslab.com or check out our website as well. We do web solutions and intranets and risk assessment, and we've been using Solr for a while. So we're glad to help you get started or to hear stories how you've been using Solr and discuss all that. Or if you have any questions right now, I'm available. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any questions?
Thank you for the talk. I've been playing around with Solr myself for the last 1.5 years, and what I've noticed is it really takes time to, I mean a lot of time to really know what you're doing with getting to know the whole search engine and all the indexing, and there are a lot of moving parts. And a lot of small things can go wrong. I followed the training. Can you give some advice on how to start with knowing this search server part? How did you get into this?
That's rather tricky because it really depends on what you need for your use case. I thought that it was rather easy to get the very basic stuff running, and then it really depends. You can branch out and look at the query language, for example, and all the ands and ors and stuff that you can do there, or you're more interested in highlighting or in boosting. So it's really tricky to give general advice there, I think. But I found that yeah, the Solr wiki has a lot of information on almost all the topics that you can imagine. So I find myself there a lot of the time. And yeah, I think that's the most general thing that I can say right now. Yeah, maybe wait for the mic so that we have it.
Yeah, I just recently used Solr, and I didn't know it before, but I used it in context with Django. But for there, I generated some integration tests where I actually had the same data every time, and started a Solr instance and made the same search query, and did some counting on the results to make sure that it was the same thing every time, so I didn't break the indexes and stuff like that. That's also one way to make sure that it works as intended, and a way to learn Solr while developing.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Nice talk, very clear. I have a question about this asynchronous indexing. Can you turn it off and on by query? So for example, when you create your event in the calendar, you have the synchronous indexing, and when you upload many files, you have asynchronous indexing by specifying some request parameter to Solr.
Not that easily as far as I know, because you have to have some commit strategy in place in the Solr instance itself if you don't do automatic commits, but do it asynchronously. So, but if you have them configured and everything, the asynchronous commits, then I think you can also send an explicit commit now command to Solr.
That would be great.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, can be handy.
Questions?
Maybe it's very basic, but when you make a search in Job, you get the results for which you have permissions, you have rights. How do you manage that with Solr?
That depends a bit on the approach, whether you're using collective Solr or Scorched or something, but in the end, it's more or less the same. You have an allowed roles and users index in the portal catalog, and you do something like that in Solr as well. So you can just query, give me these results that these users are allowed to see.
Is this native, or you have to implement it?
You basically have to implement like all the other indexes that you have, yeah.
How about unindexing stuff? Do you have seen any risk in that, or does that just work?
Unindexing, you mean removing from Solr?
Yes. So any issues where you can have results available at Solr that are not anymore exist in Plone?
I remember having some trouble with that in the early stages, but I think by now that's, at least in collective Solr, it's implemented pretty well. So if you're deleting objects, then they're getting removed from Solr. But as I mentioned, on rare occasions, you have some junk lying around in Solr where there's no object anymore. But there's, for example, a sync view that synchronizes the portal catalog with Solr, and that gets rid of these unwanted entries.
Two additional answers to the two questions. The first thing, if you install Solr with the collective Solr and Solr recipe, you get all these indexes in Plone. So when Manuel says you have to implement it, it is implemented in Solr, but it is implemented for you. So everything is already in place and pre-configured. You don't have to do any coding anymore. And on Asko's question, normally if you delete something in Plone, it should be properly unindexed. But of course it is an HTTP request, and if somebody, for example, restarts Solr in that moment when you delete an object in Plone, you run of course into it's not in sync anymore. And that's where we have this Solr maintenance browser view, which is great. You can re-index stuff repeatedly. You can run the sync, which really makes sure that everything is in place and so on. And it's quite quick even.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
I have two questions. The first thing is you mentioned collective recipe Solr, which was, as far as I know, bound to an old version of Solr. So I think the 5.1 something or so was, I think. And Solr actually is now at the 7 something version. So has there been an upgrade path? I know with the change in Solr 5.3, they've completely get rid of the old install methods and everything like that. And the other question is, with the newer versions like 5.3 and so on, they introduce replication, Solr Cloud and everything, so that you can replicate over several servers your Solr instances. So is there anything that we can use now for that with Plone, so that you have a high availability set up that even makes it quicker for you?
I've not followed the recipe very closely, but I had the impression that a lot has happened there. Some upgrades are there. I'm not sure about the current state, what versions are supported, but upgrading Solr itself, I found pretty easy. We upgraded, I think, from 3 to 5 recently, and that was pretty painless. I don't think we've used anything from the recipe itself, but native Solr upgrade methods or something. And about replication and Solr Cloud, that's definitely on my list. I haven't looked into that yet, I'm afraid, so I can't say anything about it right now, but that does sound exciting, yeah.
Can I chip into that question from my friendly neighbor here over here? Because I've been looking into that. I've been following the recipe and collective Solr a bit more closely the last half year. And we have a bit of a chicken and egg problem here. Many people start using Solr with the recipe, and the recipe is at the moment supporting an old version of Solr, version 4, and version 7 has just been released. But it's a bit of a community chicken and egg problem. As soon as you start using Solr and you get more experience, then you want to do more, you want to upgrade it, and then also larger companies will start to use configuration management and install their own Solr instance using another system, and they won't use the recipe instance anymore. So we're a bit stuck at the moment, a bit in the Plone community, that we have a nice starter recipe to install a Solr server, but it's very old. And many of the advanced users go away from the recipe instance to set up Solr because they have their own advanced setup method. So this is a bit of an issue we have. We might have to talk about it in an open space or maybe at sprints.
Okay, so maybe someone feels inspired right now. If you want to contribute to the recipe, please check it out, please do.
Have you used it in the same context with rel storage?
I haven't done that, but I wouldn't know why not. That should work.
I was just curious if there are some strange issues if you use it together.
No, I won't make any promises, but that sounds totally feasible, yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any experience on doing multi-site search with Solr and Plone, like searching multiple Plone sites to one Solr instance? It sounded like collective Solr is made mainly for one Plone instance at a time.
Yeah, you have to do.
We do have multiple Plone instances in one Solr core, even distributed over different SOAP servers, so that's without any problem.
Yeah, in my experience, you have to do some tweaks. So it's maybe those can even be backported at some point into collective Solr to support that a little better.
Okay, how would, if we had a multiple site to one Solr, would those maintenance views still work, or would they kind of break the catalog? If you have multiple sites in one Solr, like Alexander said, would we still be able to use those maintenance views?
I think the only thing you need to do is you need to make sure that what you index can still be recognized to belong belong to a certain site. Also, you can synchronize a single folder in the code site. So if you want to sync or index that, you can do a single
Yeah. I think what you are thinking about is you sync, and it will see what is not in your local portal catalog and then throw everything away in Solr, right? All the other sites. I think there's a danger that that might happen, yes. But I don't know.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think we're definitely taking
That's
a
a
look.
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be careful there.
Okay, so we've had many interesting questions. Let's thank the speaker, please.
Thank you.